Tucking the phone back in his pocket, he says, "I assume the agency described the pay structure." I nod. Although I'm supposed to charge by the hour, Will is offering a weekly salary that truthfully isn't great. But there's a big fat bonus if I bring the job in by the deadline, enough to make my eyes roll in my head and make that cha-ching sound like an old-fashioned cash register. More important, it would be enough to start my life over again. Will smiles, but I see there's a challenge in his eyes. "Tell me, Lucy, why should I hire you?" My mind immediately flashes to the list of credentials I'd mapped out while preparing for the interview. 1. I've always been good at letting go of things. Back in grade school, when they were collecting toy donations to raise money for the starving babies in Africa, I didn't give them old, broken junk, like some brothers of mine I could name. I even fixed up my outgrown Stingray bike to add to the pile. 2. On a recent trip to see my parents in Arizona, I managed to talk them into throwing away their entire collection of empty margarine containers, which took up 2 cupboards. 3. Anyone who can convince her 19-year-old son to go away to a drug rehab will have no trouble strong-arming some lady into giving up stuff. 4. I really, really, really need the job. Rehab costs a fortune, so I'll work hard out of sheer desperation. I pull out the copy of Things Are Not People that I brought. You should hire me because I'm organized, efficient, and an expert in the field of decluttering, I say as I hand it to him. This is for you. I would have autographed it, but that seems so pretentious. I'll admit, I was intrigued when the agency mentioned you'd written a book on clutter. Interesting title. The book is part how-to, but it's also an exploration of the way people tend to get attached to things. You know, if Susan gives you a mug, and then Susan moves away, you can't let go of the mug because it reminds you of Susan. The mug becomes Susan. What inspired you to write it? It started as an article on assignment for a magazine. I did a bit of freelancing when I worked for a PR agency, before I opened my own organizing business. I fish my resume from my bag and hand it to Will. The article was supposed to be tips for decluttering your home, but as I researched it, it grew into something different. The editor liked it so much, he suggested that I shop it as a book. How'd it sell? Why do people always ask that? Can't they just be awed by the fact that I got a book published at all? Does success always have to be based on how many copies it sold? Quite well for that type of a book. Truthfully, after I got laid off from the PR agency, I'd hoped that writing a series of books about organizing would become the next step in my career. That idea hasn't panned out since the first book was such a flop. A few months ago, with my unemployment and much of my savings having run dry, I earned a possibly bogus online degree as a professional organizer and decided to try my hand in a new field. My first client was a former neighbor who needed help running a garage sale, which I did for the fee of him helping me run mine. Then, unable to drum up any other business, and too broke to rent office space and hang my Open for Business sign, I stumbled across a referral agency that specializes in placing organizers. Will Meier is the first nibble I've had from them. He sits back in his chair and levels a look at me. You know who my mother is. I'm familiar with her work, of course. Originally, I'd planned to gush a bit at this point, mention how Marva Meier Rios practically pioneered the neo-expressionism movement back in the 1970s, how one of her paintings, Woman Freshly Tossed, is considered one of the greatest works of art of this century, how she used to hobnob with celebrities from John Lennon to Liza Minnelli, and other fun facts I'd looked up on the internet, never having heard of her before. Given Will's chilly attitude toward his mother, however, perhaps understated was the way to go. You're aware she can be difficult, he says. Who could blame her? She's sick. She's elderly. You want to see how difficult she can be? Try calling her elderly to her face. I'm only saying I can roll with the punches. There might be a few of those, too. You're joking. I get it. He leans in. Look. Here's the deal. I don't have time to babysit this project. I'm out in Hinsdale, and the drive here is a hassle. Meanwhile, I've got a crew of guys ready to work, and everything's at a standstill because the client, my mother, is being uncooperative. They can't get rid of a thing unless she says so. I need somebody in there.